Chapter 10. The rest of the evening passed in a kind of fog. Mum struggled with the computer, fiddling with wires and cables and putting them all in the wrong holes while she said things under her breath about how it was broken. When Mr. Gregor knocked on the door later, he had some extra tomatoes for them because he had bought more than he could possibly use. When he saw the wires everywhere, he ended up offering to put together the computer himself. At first, Mum refused, but after he showed her the first connection, she let him continue. Then he and Mum tried turning it on, and Mr. Gregor ended up teaching Mum about how to get on the internet and how to create files. He kept making impossibly bad jokes while he did it. Cass imagined he could probably tame a wild tiger, just through patience and listening and kindness and humor. He seemed almost like someone from another planet, like nothing bad had ever touched him. But even though he was filling the kitchen with nonsense and laughter, she escaped to her bedroom with homework. It had been too much, a day too filled with things. Starting a new school, standing up to a bully, meeting a possible new friend, and finally, horribly losing the mask. Not to mention watching Mum crumple like a used newspaper no one wanted, broken and so sad to see Cass unhappy. Cass hunched on the bed, knees drawn up tightly up to her chin, eyes dry but full of unshed tears. Why did she care so much about the mask anyway? And why did it still sing to her, even when it was gone? It sang of lost things, lost children, lost lives. It didn't make any sense. Who were those children, and why did Cass need to know? Cass, Mum called much later. Mr. Gregor's leaving. Cass came out to the kitchen where the computer was set up at one end of the table. The printer sat beside it with some paper in it. "It looks great," she said, trying to make a show of smiling. Mr. Gregor grinned, standing in the doorway. "I'll give you a lesson on it tomorrow if you like. You won't take long to pick it up, though." Then his eyes crinkled gently and he added, "I wanted to ask, everything okay at school today?" "Yes, why?" Cass said, sounding a little too loud even to her own ears. "Just checking. I promised things were going to be different at this school. Nobody picking on you? If someone was giving you a hard time, you'd tell me, wouldn't you?" His face was serious now. "You know I would help." "Nobody's picking on me," she said. Then she flushed. She wanted to say, "Ellis is picking on Deegan, though," but something stopped her from speaking. Somehow she felt like she needed to clear it with Deegan first. When she crept into bed soon after, she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from feelings that rolled and crashed like waves on an unsettled sea. She could feel herself sinking down into a dark hole of forgetting, and then she began to dream. It started as a song. It was a single voice this time, strong but far away. Cass opened her eyes and sat up. The voice wrapped around her like the after effect of a firework, a thin line of flame that urged her up, up. Cass climbed out of bed, following the voice with ears and eyes, watching as it roped around her room, climbed high up the wall, then darted through, crying out to her to follow. It was like a battle cry. She stepped lightly across the room, running her hand hesitantly through the rope of sound. As she did, it changed ever so slightly, like ripples in water. "What do you want?" Cass asked the voice. She trailed her fingers along the rope, following till it met with the wall. There, instead of touching the solid mass she expected, she discovered that her fingers disappeared out of sight, as if the wall was made of mist. She was afraid, but pressed harder. Her whole arm vanished smoothly out of sight. Then it was the easiest thing in the world to keep pushing until her whole self emerged into a night brilliant with stars. Cass stood there outside the house with the sky whirling overhead, and the very grass seemed to shiver with music she hadn't been able to hear before. The trees, the rocks, the bricks that made up the fancy houses nearby, they rang out with a song that was elemental, that had been there forever, long before people, long before there had even been an earth. She could have stood there forever, drinking it in, the wildness of it all, but she could see the voice rippling onward down the driveway that was wild with pulsing flowers. The voice wanted her to follow, so Cass did, stepping hesitantly into a night and a world that was like her own and yet not. This was a world of magic, of uncanny spirits and secrets. Anything might happen here, and she was venturing into it alone, with no one to guide her, no one except the keening voice of the mask. The voice wound along the path that was her street, but not. The houses loomed overhead, but they weren't simply houses. They were all of the things that combined to be houses, living brick and wood and stone, watching her and knowing her under those intelligent stars. Cass followed the voice past them all, then past the school. It wasn't just the school anymore either. It saw her go by, wakeful. Then she came to a place where there seemed to be stars that had fallen to earth. Constellations blinked around her on and off like fireflies, like gleaming eyes. Cass ran her fingers through them so that the stars rang like chimes. The voice wove through them, a rope of fire that called to her to push on. Now they came to a tunnel carved out of red rock. Cass held up her hands to feel her way through that knowing darkness, following the voice's battle cry. She emerged at the other end of the tunnel, and there the world curved like a huge living snake that showed Cass the way to go. She followed the curve, and it suddenly gave way to a bleak place where the stars were dimmed by cloud that covered the sky. Only the voice glowed here, although thinly through the fog. Things moved around Cass, living beings maybe. She didn't know what they wanted. They might need help, or they might not. If they could see the voice, perhaps they would follow it out of this place. Or maybe they could see and hear it, but could not follow. She was filled with sadness for them, and she wished she could help. But the voice was ahead of her now, and she hurried to follow. Silently, she sent the message to those shadowy beings. I won't forget you. Someday, somehow, she would be back, and she would help them. They climbed up out of that valley and back into the clear night sky, rising like an arc with the world turning beneath. The voice roped across the heavens and back down again to the living earth. And all around Cass suddenly was a sweetness. It was a smell, a taste. Around her she sensed others coming together in this place, drawn by the promise of abundance. She wished to stay here too, where things were freely given, where no one would go without. She wanted to go back to those beings in the fog, to tell them about this place. They would be safe here, in the light and in the warmth. But the voice zoomed past, turned sharply, and then came to a wall of living grass and rock. There it stopped and called her. Cass raced to catch up, and her heart leapt, for there, glowing through the glass, alive, calling to her along, was the mask. The fire rope of song vanished into its mouth, and the mouth moved now, joyfully singing in its own right. She had found it.